topic, and this important topic of our being as Christians and Catholics, the Logos Christology in the theology of Hans Urs vonBalthasar. As Bonhoeffer once said, nothing can be known either of God or man until God has become man in Christ Jesus. Our brother will familiarize us and with the theology, with the person of Balthasar, and he will situate him in the theology of Catholic faith. In this quest, he systematically presents the Logos Christology of Balthasar from the threefold perspective, that is the Trinitarian communion, the Incarnation, and Paschal mystery. And he also investigates Balthasar's theological relevance in today's life. Without further ado, please be prepared to listen to our brother, to engage afterwards. We'll be having, I think, 1 hour. Somewhere around 9:30, we'll have to wrap things up. And when we ask the questions, we should be short, precise, to the point. And so, please welcome our brother with a round of applause.
Thank you so much, Father, for your presentation. I am here today seated, and I would like to quote what Thomas Aquinas says, speaking about his own ancestors. He once said that I'm not that great, I'm just a dwarf sitting on the shoulders of giants. That is what I was doing when I was writing my paper. You know, it's not that I'm great or I'm clever. I was just a little baby or a dwarf, to use the word of Aquinas, sitting on the shoulders of giants. My paper is situated in the field of Christology, but more specifically, I am viewing Jesus from the perspective of one of the, what they call Christological titles, or one of the representation of Jesus, which is Logos. As you know, or those who do not know, Christology is a systematic discourse around the person of Jesus. Well, even when you approach Jesus from a dogmatic point of view, you should present him or present your theology that is in dogmatic lines within a systematic perspective. And well, because Christology is a field, is a minefield actually, that it's quite difficult to wrestle with, I chose to deliberate only on the Logos Christology, but within the theology of Hans Urs vonBalthasar. If I have to present an abstract from of my paper, I would use the following quotation. Then I read, "The Word that is God became man without ceasing to be God. The Word that is infinite became finite without ceasing to be infinite. The Word that is God took a body of flesh. He took on at the same time a body consisting of syllables, scriptures, ideas, images, verbal utterances, and preaching, since otherwise men would not have understood either that the Word really was made flesh, or that the divine person who was made flesh was really the Word. All scriptural problems must be approached through Christology. The latter is related to the Spirit, as the flesh of Christ is related to his divine nature and person." That is taken from Exploration in Theology of Hans Urs vonBalthasar. So this is, for me, the starting point. And I think the core test, if you want to understand my paper, this is the core quotation. So, because most of you are not familiar with the person of Hans Urs von Balthasar, I'm going to just first situate. I'm not going to follow the methodology of Serara, because otherwise people will get confused. I want to first present the author, then I will go to my second chapter, then chapter 3, then I conclude. So who is then Hans Urs von Balthasar? So he was a Swiss theologian. He was born in Switzerland and in a city called Lucerne. His family was of particular significance in the history of Switzerland. His father inaugurated what they call the modern church buildings. His mother was one of the co-founders of Catholic Women League in Switzerland. His brother, I think, was a Jesuit superior in Mexico. One of the sisters was also a superior in one of the part of the world, I think. So his family has impacted the church and the society, because even the libraries of Switzerland and so on, and indeed modern church buildings as we have it in Switzerland today, part of it was a fruit of the family of Hans Urs von Balthasar. One of his brothers was also a member of Swiss Guard. So we have this man who is coming from this wonderful family with a wonderful ecclesial and sociological background. He was born, as I said, or if I didn't, I will say now, in 1905, and he died in 1988. So within the span of his life, his whole life was permeated with a deep Catholic ecclesial spirit. He said he was unconsciously Catholic. So whatever he was thinking and whatever he thought was just to present the faith of the church in a way that people can understand. So the date of when he was born, at that time I think Karl Rahner was 1 year old. Henri de Lubac was 9 years old, and the great Protestant theologian Karl Barth was 19 years old. For you to see, and they will later become friends. You know, they are coming from different backgrounds, different age groups, but in the future they will all become friends. So speaking about the influences, I already mentioned Karl Barth. Karl Rahner also had a great influence on his thought. Once he acknowledged that Karl Rahner was infinitely superior as compared to him in terms of speculations, because you know, Karl Rahner today is one of the foremost Catholic theologians, and he really was a great fan of Balthasar. He was never a professor. He turned down all the teaching position that was offered to him, but for your surprise, whenever Karl Rahner was consulted, he was directing to the old man or to the young man, because Rahner was his elder. So he was always directing to him. And once Karl Rahner said to Balthasar, we were once on the left side, because before the Council of Vatican II, their theology was quite progressive. And now we are on the right, because after the Vatican Council, the church endorsed their theology. That's to say that Balthasar had great impact in the church, and as I said also, the church impacted him very much. He is one of the founders of the communion, which is, for me, you know, a school of thought in which I would like to belong. So communion was founded by him as the main figure. Then together with him were Henri de Lubac and Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, then now he's Pope Benedict XVI. For you to see how his, the group of people whom he related has really impacted the church very much. And even Pope Jean Paul II also drank a lot from the theology of Balthasar. That is why before he died, Balthasar was already nominated or appointed as a cardinal. Then they say he refused many times. Then Pope Jean Paul II told him, because of the obedience, you have to accept it. So he accepted, but I think a few days before he went to Rome to receive the cardinal regalias, he died. And Joseph Ratzinger, in his homily, or in the homily during his funeral, said, Balthasar, by dying this kind of death, he really showed that he didn't want it. I mean, he didn't want to be cardinal. He just wanted to be that poor man, I mean, by choice, living and meditating on the church. So it is also important to note that these remarks that I've just made does not say all that could be said about Balthasar and his theology. As Ratzinger remarks, once theology was no longer being measured according to its foundation, the learned man from Basel must have seen very quickly that his own voice alone was not sufficient. It is in this spirit that he founded the General Communion, together with Ratzinger and de Lubac. That is not in vain that de Lubac addresses him not so much as an individual theologian, but as a believer, a son of the church, who in his own personal accent tells us of the faith to which he has committed himself and which is the same for all. This is a quotation from de Lubac. So having said that, I can go straight to my chapter 2, and I will speak about the roots of Logos Christology. You know, we see that the Logos Christology has a substantially rich background in the Old Testament. We know that in the beginning, especially in the book of Genesis, there are many ways of interpreting the book of Genesis. But we see already in the first chapters of the book of Genesis that God created the world through his word. And he said, let there be light. So God spoke and things happened. So the word of God had a creative power, if you see, from the book of Genesis. But not only in the book of Genesis, we see also that in the Old Testament, the prophets, the word of the Lord came. Thus says the Lord. And even in the wisdom literature, we see that wisdom, which is somehow related to Logos, is somehow personified. The wisdom walks, the wisdom speaks. So these considerations that I'm making, because I'm just trying to summarize them, draw me to agree with Mackenzie when he says that one of the fundamental beliefs in ancient Hebrews is that God can speak and does speak to humanity. So in the ancient Israel, great emphasis was placed upon hearing rather than seeing. God who speaks. Our God is not mute, but our God is a living God who indeed has this relationship to us and somehow can speak to us. So if I manage to convince you that really the word of God has, the Logos has a clear background in the Old Testament, I can now call upon your attention to see how John, the evangelist, and the favorite Father Theon, draws this connection. In the beginning was the Word, chapter 1, verses 1, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And we see that the same word that was in the beginning, according to the Gospel of John, is the same, can be connected somehow to what the book of Genesis is saying. So Snackenburg and Raymond Brown, they say John is taking us the history of Jesus back at the original, at the beginnings, when God created the world. The world, the word, the Logos was with God. So that is the viewpoint of Raymond Brown and Snackenburg, and somehow is in agreement with O'Day and Sanders. They clearly stated that John was, as you are studying the book of John, you might have noticed that, some people would say that John, the Gospel of John was not written by John. It was directed to the Jewish people. It was directed to the Greek-speaking Jews. It was directed to the Greek people. But these authors that I have just quoted, they tell us that the Gospel of John as such was written by someone. You choose the person now. it is John or what, you choose the person, but was written by someone who was deeply steeped in a Jewish and Hellenistic culture. And all they say is that at the time the book of John was written, the boundaries between Hellenistic thought and the Jewish thought and Eastern Mediterranean religion were quite fluid. So we cannot, therefore, agree with Bultmann, even with the Roger Haidt, when they say that John is just somehow allowing himself to be influenced by Philo of Alexandria, by the Stoics, and indeed all the Hellenistic influence, to say that the incarnation of the Logos is a pure mythology. So we do not agree with that. It's really something, as we see in it, John was a Jewish, and it has a clear, the Logos has a clear background in the Jewish literature, and also in Greek-speaking world. So this person who wrote the book of John, whether it's the person or a collective individuals who came up with the gospel, they were fully aware of these two realities. I think it's enough about the Bible. If you want to read more, you can consult these authors. You know, what I'm doing here is just directing you to the authors. If you want to read my paper, you are welcome, but I think those authors that I've quoted and many others, they can help us also to understand. So we can go also to the ecclesial foundations of this Logos Christology. You know, as during the church history, particularly the first 5 centuries, there was a number of councils that are remarkably important for us, starting with the Council of Nicaea, convened by the Emperor Constantine. You know, one of the main problems during the Council of Nicaea was the Arian crisis. And I would like to just mention a few things, because this council is particularly important, even philosophically, if you really know what the council is, this council was all about. Because Arian denied, you know, that Jesus is co-equal, is homoousios, is of the same ousia with the Father. And Athanasius, who was one of the main influences in this council, said, no, Jesus is homoousios with the Father. Now, what the point I would like to make, and I don't know if when I was writing this paper, I was very excited because I discovered something. You know, the idea of substance in Greek thought is something that is unchangeable, you know, and when we change it, we call it transubstantiation. Even in terms of metamorphosis, there is always something that remains. So the idea of substance is something that is unchangeable, something that stands under, remains. It doesn't pass away. So to say that was the problem of Arius, because Arius was convinced of that, you know. To say that the Logos is of the same substance with the Father is to say that God can change. God is mutable. Arius refused that, because for him there was a time when the Word was not. But Athanasius, by pointing that the Word is consubstantial with the Father, and that is the discovery, he changed not only the idea of the divine, but also the idea of substance, you know. And by changing the idea of substance, he actually draws us to take the following conclusion, that substance has by its very nature, or is by its very nature, relational. You know, substance is relational by its very nature. He's changed the idea of substance. And I think that is a topic that we really can delve into and understand how, you know, the substance was understood by Spinoza maybe, and how was it understood by Aristotle in the past, and how we today, with this new insight that I'm just telling you, can we understand now substance, because by its very definition, it is relational. So for me, that's the great discovery, that we can now approach the Council of Nicaea. But you know, as I said already, they agreed on the equality of the Father and the Son. So we also see that in the Council of Constantinople, because after the Council of Nicaea, the issue was not settled, you know. And the Council of Constantinople, which was held in 381, made some progress in thinking and clarified the vocabulary. This brought about a clear understanding and recognition of the equality of the Father and the Son and their unity, you know. But let me also mention the Council of Ephesus and the Council of Chalcedon. Today there is a lot of discussion, especially amongst those theologians from Christology from below. I'm speaking about Walter Kaspar, Karl Rahner, Schoenberg, and so on. They really refused to take their cue from these ancient creeds of the church, and they decided to start their Christology from a different standpoint. But Council of Chalcedon is being attacked severely because they are saying that this council presents Jesus as an object of knowledge. Doesn't really, but we know already that the Council of Chalcedon endorses the Council of Nicaea, and in this council, the idea of substance was changed. So even the existential and ontological approach that they are now saying could well be read through or into the Council of Chalcedon. I don't know if you are understanding what I'm saying. But to finish with the Council of Ephesus, you know, here the discussion was, is Mary Christotokos or Theotokos? But the council said Mary is Theotokos, is Mother of God. So the Logos that really incarnated in her womb was really divine. Therefore, Mary is a Mother of God. And I would like just to mention these two things. The fourth evangelist makes an important shift, because now I'm concluding what I've said in the second chapter. The fourth evangelist makes an important shift in wisdom terminology. However, wisdom Sophia is a feminine noun in Greek, and indeed is often clearly depicted as a female character in wisdom literature. So by employing the term logos, if we take from the biblical point of view, by employing this term, John, which is a masculine noun, John the evangelist reshapes the wisdom tradition to reflect the historical reality of incarnation, because there should be agreement between the Logos and how he later became, which is human, a male human, not just human, because Jesus was was male when he walked among us. This short literature, as I presented, show us that the Logos Christology, from its biblical roots and church patristic perspective and beyond, and helped us to situate Balthasar Christology on the historical theological framework. I think by now you can now speak of the Logos Christology of Balthasar, because I think I spoke enough about the background, you know. Then how can we frame the Logos? I told already, it is from a threefold perspective: from the Trinitarian communion, from the incarnation, and the Paschal mystery. From the Trinitarian communion, we see that Balthasar affirms, and that is very important, that when God becomes man, then man as such becomes the expression, the valid and authentic expression of the divine mystery. In this statement, Balthasar put his finger on a highly important issue. According to him, it is in this human experience that the divine truth comes to be embedded in itself. This delicate network of relationship is strong enough to hold the absolute truth, which is in itself a truth of eternal relation in an eternal life. By saying that, vonBalthasar reasserts the fundamental thesis that can both be found in the theology of Roman Guardin and Karl Rahner. Why am I saying that? Because when I was deliberating on the Trinitarian, the Logos Christology rooted in the Trinitarian communion, because the thinking was, you know, how can we understand the Logos before the incarnation? So he was, but now I was a bit scared, because, you know, St. Augustine once said that someone once asked him, what was God doing before he created the world? So St. Augustine said, before he created the world, he was creating hell for those who was question like this. So I was also the same line. I wanted to know, I wanted to speculate how was the Logos and what was he doing with the Father, before he incarnated. Then I was discouraged by St. Augustine. And what I took is that what Calvin and Romano Guardini said, Guardini basically says that when God wants to speak, or when God wants to make himself known, he uses humanity. So humanity is the valid expression to speak about God. And Calvin said also later that man is that creature that brought death to God when he became human. So these two authors allowed me to see with Balthasar that revelation is not we should not take revelation as super mundane mysteries that just fall upon heaven to us, and we are flabbergasted. We don't know where to start and how. We have within the world authentic figures or concepts, even humanity, as I say, that we can based upon in order to understand the mystery of the Trinity. And this, if we analyze humanity, Balthasar is it's quite clear on that, because he takes humanity, but not humanity, hypothetically, but he starts with a human capacity to speak. Human capacity, because we are speaking about the Logos, the utterance, the word. He takes the human capacity to speak, and he says that the human speech is a free manifestation of the person to others in a significant sound. When I'm speaking, I'm manifesting myself to others in a significant sound. So today there are manipulation of language, and really this is now becoming a bit difficult. But in the ancient world, and I remember when my father tells me "palabra de honra," it means that really here the old man is speaking, and he can give his life for that. It's a free manifestation, because now we can even cook. Some of us are cooks and others, I don't know, but you can even manipulate language to acquire what you want. But that was not the aim of language. It's about manifesting yourself to others in a significant sound. So this thesis is further explained as follows. First, the word represents a self-possession on the part of the spiritual person who knows his own truth. Second, possession of one's own truth means perfect freedom. Third, in the truth and freedom that follows on self-possession, the personal spirit is the universal and necessary element, which means that from the outset it goes beyond subjectivity and reaches out to other persons, in principle every other person, its existence always implying a relationship to them. Balthasar analysis seems to reconcile the existential and ontological approach to the Holy Trinity, because we see that it's not only at the existential level that we communicate. He says that speech is not a mere epiphenomenon of our being, but is a manifestation of our inner personality. So it has an ontological component to it. And here we can see, and it's valid, this reconciliation of ontological and existential approach, because Barth asked himself, if revelation can be believed if in the background there is always the thought that we are not dealing with God as he is, but only as he appears to us. When we are speaking, when we see the Bible, are we seeing God as he is, or as the way God he appears to us? So we should be very careful and somehow be bold enough to reconcile these two. Then Balthasar sums it up this way. The word means communion and mutual intercourse from the very beginning. You know, mutual intercourse from the very beginning. Speech, therefore, is no mere epiphenomenon of man, but an integral part of his very being. So, the Logos, Jesus is the exegesis of the Father, is expression of the Father, is the one who shows us the loving face, you know, the interpretation of the Father, the reason of the Father, the truth of God. Jesus really, the Logos really, and the speech as such is not just a mere epiphenomenon. So, but we should be careful, because here we also have the other part of the coin, which is how the Trinity also helps us to see. I was showing just how our human makeup can help us to really understand the Trinity in different way, but also the Trinity, which is this mutual intercourse from the very beginning, you know, this mutual communion, relationship between the person of the Holy Trinity, draw us to understand that we are also, as human beings, relational beings, because we are created in the image of God. By saying that, I would finish with what he says, that our human nature and the Trinitarian God that we believe in image one another, but they image each other in an inverse symmetry, to use the words of Balthasar, per contrarium, which means that it's in an analogous way. You know, it's not this. It's not like how can I say? It's not like the way we image the divine absolutely correspond to what the divine is. You know, and the way the way God also images us is not absolutely. So there is difference in similarities, I would say. Now we can speak about the incarnation. So the incarnation, as you know, is a mystery. You know, it's a mystery. And Matthias Schüben says it's the mystery upon which all other mysteries should be understood in Christian life. But when we speak about the incarnation, there are different ways of approaching the incarnation. One approach is from those who are doing Christology from below, and because, you know, Christology from below starts from the humanity of Christ, and the one of above starts from the divinity of Christ, or the divinity of the Logos. Balthasar does not do any of these two approaches, and well, I have no time to go into that. If you want to read really that, you have to take my paper or you go somewhere else. Gerardo Collins, you know, I think he explained it very well. Incarnation, so to say, can be viewed from different perspectives. But what is important is that, and Balthasar argues that this doctrine yields to us in an unexpected way that fissure in the monad through which God comes to live in the soul and the soul migrates into God. You know, it's basically, if I should say, is that when we are viewing incarnation, we should not be confused by what people are saying now. You know, many theologians and Christologists are saying that incarnation is almost like the process of enculturation. You know, yeah, where some values are deeply imbued in your own being. It's not that. Even Roger Hyde says that God, Jesus is God in the sense that the disciples encountered God in him. That is basically how we understand the incarnation. But the incarnation really is, you know, and here I think there is a clear agreement between Balthasar and Gerardo Collins. You know, they are mutually exclusive characteristics being attributed to each other, but not within the same frame of reference. You know, so that God really becomes human, and our humanity is assumed. So I think it's Saint Irenaeus who said first in his Adversus Heresies that God became human so that we, as humanity, will have a share in his divinity. And this also was elaborated later by other theologians. And I'm not going to really go into that. So basically, that's the point, that God came and dwelt among us. Whether we believe it or not, it does not make it true or false. I mean, it's true or false regardless of our belief. So our belief in the incarnation does not make it true or false. My brothers, even if you go out now telling that God is not, Jesus is not God, it does not make it true or false. Even if you come with many ideas, yeah, it's true or false regardless of our belief. But historically speaking, and the church assures us, and the history of the church shows us that indeed God incarnated, dwelt among us, and Jesus is really God. And I think that's the point of my paper. Jesus is God. And now I'm convinced, after reading Balthasar, that Jesus is God. That was my crisis before I wrote, because I was reading, Christology of Christ of history, Christ of faith, and I was confused. John Mayer has 3 volumes there, The Marginal Jew. I was totally confused. I didn't know where to go. So I took the other book of Roger Height. I was also even more, because they destroyed everything. So I was confused. But now I'm convinced, and Balthasar convinced me, that Jesus is God. And for me, even if you come now, even in the Ghana, say that Jesus is God. For me, it's clear, absolutely clear. And I'm still reading the Fathers of the Church, the School of Communion, Cardinal de Lubac, I'm clear now. Jesus is God.
God, yes.
Yeah. So now, how the Paschal mystery. Jesus' exposition of the Father in words and deeds finds its fulfillment in the Paschal mystery. Thereupon, Balthasar stresses the obedience that takes the divine Son from incarnation to passion, an obedience which translates his inner Trinitarian being as the Logos, filial responsiveness to the Father. Balthasar's thought on the Paschal mystery centers on the Holy Saturday, in which the mystery of Christ's descent into hell is brought to light. Within this perspective, vonBalthasar asserts that the descent is the final point reached by kenosis, and kenosis the supreme expression of the inter-Trinitarian love. The Christ of Holy Saturday, say Balthasar, is the consummate icon of what God is like, and that is what really touched Pope John Paul II. John Paul II liked very much this theology of Balthasar, especially the theology of Holy Saturday. And this really, even myself, I'm touched. In addition, the descent into hell, no, I'm not preaching, the descent into hell, or to the dead, has a central place in Balthasar's understanding of the Paschal mystery. Writing writes that the article about the Lord's descent into hell reminds us that not only his speech, but also his silence is part of God's revelation. It also reminds us that God cannot be regarded only as that comprehensible word that reaches us in Christ. God is also the silent, inaccessible, incomprehensible, incomprehensible ground that alludes to us. Jesus died on the cross with a question to his seemingly vanished God. The Lubac says, this is the only day in which Nietzsche is right. God is dead. That's why he had forsaken me. Jesus died with the surrender of his spirit in the hands of the absent. Died with a loud cry, in which, according to Nicholas of Cusa, God, no longer articulable word, writes its culmination. Now, the word, Balthasar likes this expression, the wordless word. I don't know how to pronounce it properly. Wordless word. So, word without the word, so to say. But we know that this is not the end of Jesus. There is resurrection, where the divine Son comes back to life. And Balthasar is quite clear. He first of all analyzes, the sayings of Jesus. I am the life. I am the true vine. So who abides in me will never die. So for him, by analyzing, even he discusses also the empty tomb and so on, but he takes, because he's reconciling many things here. He says that it is illogical enough to expect that this person, you know, who is the life himself, would come back to life, because life should not be terminated. I think with that I can finish the discourse on the Paschal mystery. If you want to read more, you can really see my, if the application is very simple, and for me this is, yeah, I can do it in 2 minutes. First of all, we should consider that Balthasar is fully aware that, because I'm applying this theology to the contemporary world, which is marked by atheistic scientism and secularism. You know, one confrere once said in Cameroon, we should not lead people to heaven as if the earth does not exist. You know, should not, I like that expression. If I knew before, I could put it in my message, but I didn't. The thing is that the atheists have laid so much emphasis on the issue that God is dead, that people in secular society started even putting it into laws. So you see that countries that were very much Christian now are becoming secular. You know, Europe is becoming very secular. Our brothers and sisters in Europe are becoming very secular. Even the church in Europe is being secularized. So, and this mentality is also coming to Africa, to Asia, and many parts of the world. I remember, even is in my research paper, in Angola also, it's a secular country. We can say that the constitution says that we are a secular country. So whether we want it, I don't know how about South Africa. You know, it's a secular country. That's why we approve abortion, we approve everything. So the constitution does not have space for God, because it's secular. And some of them, when you even start bringing God, say, no, go to church. So religion is relegated to a purely private sphere. And Richard Dawkins once said that we should be considered like a child abuse to teach catechism to the little kids. So I'm abusing my kids in Eastwood because I'm teaching them catechism, according to Richard Dawkins, because they are kids, they don't know. Why should you teach them? It's a child abuse. So, and this too, you know, secular is not necessarily atheist, but because secular is basically saying that we should concentrate ourselves on this world, forget about the eschaton, concentrate on this world. And the atheists are saying that this world is all there is no a new world to come. So I'm wrestling with them to the extent that they are connected. And for me, I see that this secular society, like for instance in Angola, people like politicians and so on, they are purely secular, because the MPLA, for instance, is a Marxist party of Leninist influence. They are Marxists. They said clearly that in the new Angola that we are building from 1975, people should move past this age of believing God. It belongs to the child. Even traditional values out. This is superstitions. We are in the new Angola. And many of the people, many of our parents, especially those who were from the MPLA, like my father, I don't know about your parents, Andre, but my father clearly doesn't go. I know that my father doesn't go to church. It's not, I think the father don't know that my father doesn't go to church, because for him it's a matter, it's for MPLA, you know. And I grew up, so I was not going to church also when I was young, because it was really, it's just a recreation. You go there, you dance a little bit, but there's no, you know, yeah. The thing is, it creates this kind of society, create people without values, proper values that humanize humanity. And the Logos Christology of Balthasar show us three things, and I will address, I think, 4 things, no, 3 things. First of all, that love alone is credible. Because we know that even in secular societies like Angola, people like to love each other, you know. People love each other, and the parents love each other. But we know that even kids in Angola sometimes are found in the dustbin. Even here in South Africa, many parts of Africa. Even the place where we say Ubuntu, I am because we are, we know that albinos, they are killed in these societies. You know, people who are crippled are abused also. So the love of this world, it's not the love that God provides, it's limited. So Balthasar says that by taking us, you know, to the intertrinitarian life, when love is eternal, we are clearly assured that there will never be a moment where love will miss. If we define person in terms of relations, and the Trinity is also relational, you know, this love will always be with you. So you will always be a person. It's a humanist statement. You will always be a person, even you are thrown in a dustbin, because the love of God surpasses the love of your mother. You know, surpass the love of your clan who is ostracizing you, so to say. Then there is also the other aspect, and the thing with love is that, you know, when we are speaking with the atheist, people are much more practical, you know. Love is better lived than explained. And the God that Balthasar is, the theology of Balthasar should really help us to live the relational life, you know, relate to each other, but in a very humane way. The ecological crisis also, we see that people are speaking about ecology, but the problem is humanity is also being put at the same level with the plants, and you find even in countries where if you abort a monkey, if you cause a monkey to abort,